little bit in more depth about this particular climate science center. But before I do, let me tell you a little bit about my background, how I got here, and the non-linear route that I took to find myself here. And I think many of you in your careers will find that your roots are not straight lines. So I grew up in Wisconsin, and was fortunate to grow up in Madison, where the University of Wisconsin is, and I did my bachelor's degree there at University of Wisconsin. My intention going in was to be a chemical engineering major and work on issues of renewable energy, and I took two of the required chemistry courses for chemistry majors and found myself down in the chemistry lab for 8 hours a week with test tubes and other things, and I didn't see the sky, and I decided chemistry was no longer for me because I needed to actually see something that looked like the outdoors from time to time. So I kind of wandered around. I decided, well, if I have a math degree, I can make it to any graduate school, so I'll just go ahead and change my major to math, which I did. And then after my sophomore year in college, I wanted to take a class over the summertime so that I could reduce the total credits that I needed to take later on, and I picked meteorology. So I lived right across the street from the meteorology building, and in summertime, what better thing to do other than just roll out of bed into class and then roll back into bed again. So I selected meteorology because it was right across the street. I fell in love with meteorology when I took that class, and added that to my major, so I graduated with meteorology and math, and then as a meteorology major who is interested in severe local storms, where in the world would you come for graduate school but the University of Oklahoma? So Storm Central, so to speak. So my master's work was actually on numerical modeling of what we call a supercell thunderstorm, or one of the very intense thunderstorms that we see in this part of the country. And you'll meet my master's advisor actually later this week, Kelvin Drogemeyer. He was my master's advisor and now is the vice president for research for the University of Oklahoma. And he was also Derek's master's advisor. So both of us have a way of getting him to places when we need him. Then I decided after my master's work that I was kind of tired of school, so I wanted to get a job, see how the real world worked, and went out into the workforce, but I stayed here at the University of Oklahoma. I joined the Oklahoma Climate Survey, which is, at that time, it was a few miles away, but now today's climate survey is in the National Weather Center building, which you'll see later this week. And the Oklahoma Climate Survey is actually a state agency that's housed here at the University of Oklahoma. And so the benefit of the climate survey was that our stakeholders were all across the state of Oklahoma. So many of the groups within the University of Oklahoma work with the students, and we could work with the students on a regular basis. But a lot of the research groups in the university are fairly insular. So they see graduate students and undergraduate students, but they don't work with others outside the university all that often. But that group, our mission was to work with those across the state. So they might be growers, they might be water managers, they might be broadcast meteorologists, anybody who needed weather or climate information. And during my time there, we built what was called the Oklahoma Mesonet, which is a statewide network of 120 weather and climate monitoring stations. So it just celebrated its 20th anniversary this past year. And so much of what I did was to help build that network and then help people figure out how to use those data in their decisions, because most people outside the doors of your university are not in your area of expertise, and so it's important to do that translation of information to those people, and to do what Bill Hook talked about last night, and to listen to them very carefully. So scientists tend to just say, this is something cool here, I'm just going to throw it at you and you should use it. And one of the things that was really embedded in the culture at the Climate Survey, and we're embedding in the culture here at the Climate Science Centers, is that we need to listen to the people who are actually going to use our information. And the adaptation of those products should be on our end and not necessarily on their end. The call for proposals came up for the Climate Science Centers a few years ago, and our dean at the college, who you'll meet, Barry and Moore, he and I decided that this was something that we needed to bring to the university as an enhancement to the great activities that have been going on for 5 decades here in the realm of weather. University of Oklahoma had not really been known worldwide in the area of climate, but we had some excellent climate researchers to build a program on. And so he and I worked together on writing the award for the Climate Science Center. So these Climate Science Centers in all of the regions were bid out to universities. In our region, there were 4 different universities that wrote proposals for hosting the Climate Science Center. And so if you don't know how these things are put together, sometimes it's just by happenstance. So when it came to the fact that there were 4 universities that wanted to lead a South Central Climate Science Center proposal, that meant that those other 3 universities could not be your partners because they're going to lead an effort themselves, and then they would go out and seek partners across the landscape. So one of the ways that universities typically do that is if you're already partnered with another university working on some projects and that partnership is working out well, then that makes a good partner for the next venture. So we can take Louisiana State University as an example of that. So Louisiana State became one of our partners in the Climate Science Center because we had a long-term partnership with them through what's called the NOAA RESA program. So this is the partnership that was put together for our particular proposal and led by University of Oklahoma. So we're the host organization, and each of these Climate Science Centers has a host university that Allison showed. And so Louisiana State University provides our coastal and wetland expertise. Texas Tech University, dry land and agriculture. Oklahoma State University, also our agriculture, but they had been partners with us for 20 years on building the Oklahoma Mesonet. So that's a jointly operated weather and climate network between the 2 universities. And then we had a partnership with the Chickasaw Nation. We'd been working with the Chickasaw Nation at the Oklahoma Climate Survey for a number of years on water resources related issues. And they also brought the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma to the table because the 2 of them were working together very closely. And then our dean, Barry and Moore, had a very long-term relationship with NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab, which is the arrow pointing toward New Jersey. So we say it's in South Central New Jersey. It counts in the South Central region. So that's the consortium that we brought to the table. And once the Climate Science Center was established, then we work with anyone and everyone in our partnership. So we are, we believe that the part of our strength is this world-class atmospheric sciences community. So if you aren't aware, Norman, Oklahoma holds the 3rd largest atmospheric sciences community in the nation. So we're behind Washington, D.C., which is where all of the bureaucrats are at National Weather Service and NOAA headquarters. And we're behind Boulder, Colorado, where the National Center for Atmospheric Research is, and their focus is primarily on climate. But we have over 600 atmospheric scientists and associated researchers within our weather community here. We have also a large team of biological scientists. So John Zach from Texas Tech, who you'll hear later, is an example of one of those. And then we had extensive experience on our team for looking at climate impacts assessment, adaptation and mitigation, which is the areas that USGS is interested in. We have a lot of outreach. So I mentioned the Oklahoma Climate Survey is one of these outreach agencies. We also have 4 other surveys on campus that have different focuses. One of them is a biological survey. And then we have our agriculture extension, our sea grant, and areas that we can, and users that we can work with and have worked with for years. And then with the Oklahoma Mesonet and West Texas Mesonet and similar other observing systems, we do have the region's best observing system. We also are very unique in our consortium. We are the only climate science center that has tribal nations as full partners in our consortium, meaning that they're at the table every time that there's decisions made by the consortium. We talk to each other on we have a conference call every 2 weeks, and so when decisions need to be made, they're at the table. And that was very important to us in this region. There's 70 tribes within the South Central Climate Science Center region. And having the perspective of the tribes in not only what science is important in the region, but how do you actually frame your research question. So you could take a specific research question and you can think about framing it in many different ways. And so there are ways to frame those questions that would eliminate certain cultures from participating in that science. And so having the nations on board is very important to us. And of course, the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab is one of the world leaders in climate modeling and model interpretation. So they're one of the groups that participates in the submission of model results to the world community to use in assessments of changes in our climate. So just for a bit of background, we do as a consortium receive annual base funding to host the Climate Science Center. So on this campus here, we have some people who are funded full-time from the Climate Science Center. And then in the consortium institutions, there's funding either for full-time personnel or graduate students. Some of you are likely funded off of the Climate Science Center base funding. And this helps us establish a structure where we can then go out and look for other partners. Then there is annual science funding that's available. In fact, there's a request for proposals that's open currently, and it's due tomorrow for letters of intent. And so all of the universities within the consortium, all of the USGS agencies within our region and beyond can submit proposals, and anyone who's not within the consortium can team with a consortium institution and submit proposals to that process. So it could be that you think of an idea this week for the next proposal call and submit a statement of interest to the next annual science call for funding for your research. These are competitively bid and peer reviewed after the statements of interest go out, then or come in. Then they're reviewed by a panel, which will include some of the LCC coordinators that you meet here in the room, and others out there. And then they will ask for full proposals to be written for a smaller group, and then funding provided by the USGS for that. There's also a small bit of directed funding. So this workshop itself was a direct funded effort by the USGS, and that was a choice by our Climate Science Center director, Dr. Kim Winton. Kim, will you wave your hand? So she has a pot of money that can, fund her travel to workshops and other things, but also for items that may be a little bit unusual. So this early career workshop didn't necessarily fall under the specific science priorities of the annual science funding call, and so she can choose if it's a good idea to go ahead and fund that. Those are also peer reviewed. So everything, as the USGS always does, is done through peer review. So this is just some examples of science funding. So you'll see that there's a wide range of examples. People in all of the fields that are represented here today can access that funding as long as the research is relevant to the science priorities that are written in the request for proposals. One of the other areas of emphasis, because in the process of requesting to be the host center, putting in a grant to be the host center, the University of Oklahoma stepped up and provided cost match to our grant. And one of the things that they did was they put $150,000 of cash every year on the table for the Climate Science Center. And so the University of Oklahoma can then choose how to distribute that to help benefit the center. And one of the things that we have chosen to do is to really look at this broader aspect of how users can apply downscaled climate information. So you'll hear a little bit more about that this week from both Keith Dixon at GFDL and Carlos Gaitan, who's a University of Oklahoma employee who's housed at GFDL in South Central New Jersey. And so we have some emphasis on downscaled climate projections and how people can use that. One of the other things that this consortium brings to the table that the USGS as a federal agency cannot apply to other federal agencies for grant funding. So for example, the National Science Foundation provides science funding that people in the USGS as leaders cannot apply for directly, but universities can apply for that. So this is the benefit of this partnership between the USGS and the universities and their consortium. So one example of that is, okay, our base funding for 5 years from USGS is $4 million. And 1 year into the project, we went out and we, Oklahoma State University, Duncan Wilson, as the science lead there, and then a big team from both universities won a $20 million National Science Foundation grant through the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. And that program was to, or that grant was to look at how do we adapt socio-ecological systems within Oklahoma to climate variability and climate change. And I'm happy that one of our participants here is a new faculty member who his funding has resulted from that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build the capacity within the South Central region to do these bigger science, more complex problems. And we also coordinated with the USDA in their bid for the Regional Climate Hub, which is at El Reno, selected in El Reno, which is west of Oklahoma City. And so these are the types of things that we do. So just so that you know us a little bit better, our director, as I mentioned, is Kim Winton. So this is a co-governed organization. She's on the federal side. And then Barry and Moore and I are her counterparts on the university side. And then you've either met some of these people or you will be meeting all of these people today and throughout the week. And that's our main office is just around the corner in this building.